it's been so many days in a row that I haven't spoken out loud. My voice is kind of all creaky, cracky. Okay, so I think I found more land. And I'm super excited to share this with you, and so that you can give me some feedback and we can discuss it and see if there's more land that is being admitted to by NASA of all people. So I know that they're kind of sketchy bacon. We don't want to trust them too much. But I think that, okay, this is how I see it. At some point, NASA's going to have to come clean. As more and more people start looking into the whole flat earth theory or the rejection of the globe model, people are going to see that the globe model just doesn't work. And the only reason that more people haven't realized this is because people aren't looking into it. People aren't questioning. They've just been taught the world is a globe when they were 4. And then they just kind of stuck with that. And then they're given these, oh, just gravity. But if you actually look into it, then you find out, oh, except that they're not exactly sure how gravity works, because the whole space-time fabric bending thing is complete nonsense. Then in order to reconcile gravity at the macro scale, so just between galaxies and stars, then just space-time bending, and then to reconcile that with the micro nano quantum scale, just between little particles, you need gravitons to communicate the force between two particles. And they haven't found gravitons because there are none to be found, because the theory of gravity is nonsense. That's not the point. The point is that when you ask scientists how does everything work, and then scientists say, well, because gravity, but then everyone just kind of says, oh, right, yes, gravity. Okay, that makes sense. No, you have to understand things. You can't just accept, otherwise it's just religion. If you're just accepting, when people say because gravity, if you just accept that, then you just have religious faith in science or NASA or scientists, really, and scientism. Some educated, smart people are actually not smarter than average. They just have more knowledge. But having knowledge doesn't mean you know how to interpret it or you know how to abstract from it what's meaningful or what's plausible or true. More importantly, it's really easy to create a model that describes some aspects of reality and then believe that that model is true, even though that model is not true. It's an approximation, but it fits for some things, but not others. There are a lot of problems in physics that scientists kind of just gloss over when they're talking to the general public because they don't want to be undermined. And you don't know that. And so you're just accepting what they're saying and you're thinking, well, he's super smart, so he's obviously telling me the truth. No, he's just telling you what fits his model. Anyway, and so don't accept things from people just because you think that they're smarter than you, because sometimes they're not. Sometimes they are, though, and when they are, you should still always evaluate the validity of the information, because even smart people make mistakes. Even smart people believe nonsense sometimes. And also the stuff that they learned in their first 2 years of university, where they were just keeners and trying to impress their professors, and so they just kind of accept whatever the professor says is true as true, even though sometimes professors are mistaken. Sometimes science is wrong. And if you have all these young, keen scientists that are just accepting what their professor says because it comes from someone important and prestigious, legitimate, then that's when you have all kinds of problems. So when a scientist says, because gravity, you need to push further, because what you'll find is that they don't know how gravity works. They don't know how to reconcile gravity between the macro and the quantum. And there are a lot of problems with that. And they have to put in all these kind of fudging numbers, these constants, fudging factors to make everything work out. And then they tell you, oh, but look, it works out perfectly. No, it works out perfectly because you've added constants, or you've cancelled out infinities, or you've tweaked things so that it gives you the result that you need it to give. So I have been thinking about the ISS. Now, there are going to be two groups of people. People that believe that the ISS is actually zipping around the globe Earth, and then there are going to be those of you that know better. I'm going to cover both sides just to kind of be inclusive. First of all, we just have to make a quick comment about the ISS. Metals melt at different temperatures, and they freeze at different temperatures. And what that means is that some metals start going soft and bending or warping at different temperatures than other metals and materials. So if you make something out of different metals and different materials, and then you heat them up really fast, and then you cool them down really fast, then what's going to happen is, because things have different temperatures at which they start kind of softening up and expanding when they're hot and contracting when they're cold, what happens is things crack and just as all gets broken and just tears itself apart. So the ISS is just fiction that it's in space orbiting. However, when this comes out, when people realize that this model that we've been told is the correct one, which is demonstrably false, when that comes out and people realize, they are going to be angry at NASA. And so I think NASA is trying to mediate the level of anger by telling some truths. At least about our world, not about space. I found proof that NASA is telling us that our world is bigger than everybody else is saying that it is, and that NASA itself is saying that it is. So everyone is saying that the Earth has a circumference of 24,900 miles, approximately. NASA says that as well on its website and its publications. But then they give us other information that, when you put it together, suggests that the circumference, that the landmass, is larger. I leave it to you to decide if you think, is NASA just lying and this is just another lie in among all the other lies, even though it's kind of like a sneaky lie that you actually have to dig to find? Or is this a truth that they're hiding under their lies? And if that's the case, why are they letting us know? I think it's interesting. So let's look at the discrepancy that I found that suggests that there's more land, and you can figure out what you think. So I'm going to use my whiteboard to show you what I did. Are you as excited as I am to see my whiteboard? I'm going to show you the calculations that I did. A while ago, there was this idea that the circumference of a circle obviously is bigger. The bigger the circle, I'm not explaining this well at all. If you are driving a car on the Earth, then the distance between 2 points, let's say, is 10 miles. The further up in the atmosphere you are, the greater the distance between the 2 points, your starting point and your ending point, because you're tracing the path of a bigger circle. Here you have the Earth circle, the circumference 24,901 miles, and then you can see the little plane here, and the plane, because it's above the surface of the Earth and it's flying around, its path takes it along a larger circumference, and the higher up you go, the larger that circumference is going to be. And so a plane at 7 miles up, which is a normal plane that you would travel in, 37,000 feet-ish, is 7 miles up, it's going to obviously be going around a larger circle than a car traveling from one spot to the other on the Earth, or from a plane that's even higher up. The ISS, which here I have it at 240 miles, I did this drawing just for myself the other day, but I didn't want to have to recreate it all, is obviously tracing the circumference of a much larger circle. So the distance between those same 2 points would be greater. This little car is going from Paris to Seattle. And then you can see this blue line is the circle for the plane that's 7 miles up, going from Paris all the way to Seattle. Here at 14 miles up, we have a super duper plane going from Paris to Seattle. And so you could see that the distance that they're traveling is greater the higher up you go. Here we have the ISS. So the ISS has to go around this huge circle. So the distance for the ISS is even greater. And so then math.
And then circumference is diameter times pi. And so the diameter then is the circumference divided by pi. And so I took the circumference of the Earth, and the diameter using my calculation is 7,926.23 miles, which is close enough to what is the standard given diameter. The standard model tells us that the Earth is an oblate spheroid, not a perfect sphere. So the diameter from north to south is slightly different from the diameter from east to west. So that's why there's a rough approximation for the diameter. And so then the circumference of this circle at 7 miles up, the distance that you'd be traveling on a plane, on a globe model, the circumference you'd be traveling, instead of being 24,901 miles, would be 24,923 miles. And if you were 14 miles up, then the circumference of your circle is 24,945 miles. So you can see it's starting to not just increase, but also it's increasing at a faster rate. For the ISS, if it's at 240 miles, then the circumference of the circular orbit that we are told it's going around, 25,655 miles. And how do we find this? We find this using the circumference equals diameter times pi. That's the equation to find the circumference of a circle. Here I've looked up what is the distance from Paris to Seattle, and I just quickly Google mapped it, and Google Map told me, okay, it's 4,994 miles. 4,994 miles is about 20% of the circumference that we're given of the Earth at 24,901 miles. And so then we can double check. We put distance over circumference equals watt over 100 to find the percentage. And the distance is 4994 over the circumference equals watt over 100 equals 20.05. So we say 20%. And then we can calculate 20% of the circumference of the circle that the plane is traveling around, and that distance then is 4,998 miles. And for a plane at 14 miles above the surface of the Earth, that would be about 70,000 feet, then you'd be traveling 5,003 miles to get from Paris to Seattle. For the ISS to go from Paris to Seattle, it would have to cover, cross, fly, orbit 5,145 miles.
Ladies, gentlemen, I found more land. If we assume that the information that is given to us from the ISS is instead, because the ISS is impossible, instead is coming from high altitude balloons or high altitude planes, things, high altitude flying, military industrial complex devices. If you ask NASA, what is the circumference of the Earth? Now, it doesn't really matter if you think of the Earth as a globe or if you think of the Earth as flat. Because if you think of the Earth as flat, then the path that the ISS would travel on would be the equivalent, for all intents and purposes, of the circumference of the globe Earth. If we find discrepancies between the circumference of the Earth at the distance at which we're told the ISS travels, then what does that tell us? It tells us either NASA is sneaky trying to put out real information to those of us who know truths that maybe the mainstream hasn't really jumped on board yet, or it allows us to see that the information that they're giving is simply wrong. If the ISS really was in this orbit around this globe Earth, then if there's a discrepancy in the circumference that the ISS is traveling around, then that would indicate that the Earth is bigger than we're told it is. There's a mystery here. I'm going to show you what I did. It's super easy. You can do this at home. You don't need any complex math. I'm going to walk you through it. It's really easy. The key is going to be showing the whiteboard without showing too much of my profile, because I don't like my profile. Then it's all bad. So let's make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, so what are some things you need to know before we start? In order to make this as accurate as possible, or to prevent some of the arguments that we all know that the trolls are going to leave, I tried to do this with in three different ways, so that it's more troll proof. On its website, NASA tells us that the ISS is actually orbiting the Earth at a height of 248 miles. And we can check the circumference of the Earth on the NASA website and on Google and on other science and astronomy websites, also textbooks. And we get a circumference of 24,901 miles from Google. I'm using Google because Google and NASA just, it's all the same. Evil people. Cabal. If we take what NASA's telling us is true, that the Earth is a globe and the ISS is orbiting around at 248 miles above, then from all the other information that we can find on NASA's website, what can we determine about our world and the size of it? NASA tells us that the ISS is traveling at 17,500 miles per hour, so per 60 minutes. And then they also tell us that the ISS makes one complete orbit of the Earth in every 90 minutes. So then we can calculate how many miles does the ISS travel in 90 minutes, and that will tell us the distance of that circle, of the circumference of the circle that the ISS is traveling. So we want to know how many miles is the ISS covering in that 90 minutes, and then that tells us about the size of the world. So 17,500 miles per 60 minutes equals how many miles per 90 minutes. So we just do cross multiplication and then division, and we do 90 minutes times 17,500 divided by 60 gives us the number of miles per 90 minutes, or per one circle around the Earth. And it turns out that the answer is 26,250 miles. Okay, so then now we have the circumference of the circle that the ISS is tracing as it orbits this globe in their model. From this, we can calculate the diameter of that circle. And then when we have the diameter of that circle, then we just have to subtract the 248 miles above the surface of the Earth on both sides, because the diameter cuts across. And then that will give us the diameter of the world that this ISS is encircling. So what we know is that circumference equals the diameter times pi. And so the diameter equals the circumference divided by pi. When we divide the 26,250 mile circumference that the ISS travels across, it gives us a diameter of 8,355.6 miles. So this is the diameter of the circle that the ISS is traveling around. And so then to figure out the size of the Earth within that, we subtract the 248 miles twice, once up here, once down here. And then once we've done that, what do we get? 8,355.6 miles minus 496 miles equals 7,859.6 miles. So NASA's telling us that the world the ISS is orbiting has a diameter of 7,859.9 miles. But Google tells us that the Earth has a diameter of 7,918 miles. And NASA itself on its website tells us that the diameter of the Earth is 7,900 miles. But then it puts a little asterisk there, and it says that that's the numbers that are provided simplified for young students. So NASA wants young students to use this simplified 7,900 for their calculations when they are learning about the Earth. So they're telling children that this is the number to use to make their calculations. So I said, okay, we will use that to see what they're teaching our kids. Not mine, I don't have kids. I don't want kids. I'm a little bit afraid of kids because they are vectors of disease. So the diameter of the world that the ISS is orbiting is different from the world that Google is describing by 40 41-ish, 42-ish miles different. And from the world that NASA is telling students about, young students about, is 59.6 miles. What about circumference? The circumference of the world that we're given by Google and all the peoples is 24,901 miles. The circumference that we calculate from the ISS information, so what we have to do is we take the diameter from our ISS calculation times pi equals the circumference of the world that the ISS is orbiting. Using the diameter from Google, 7,917.5, and the height of the ISS, the 248 miles twice, or 496 miles, we get a circumference of 26,431.8 miles. So here we're off by 181.8 miles. So when you take the circumference that the ISS numbers tell us it's orbiting, which is 26,250 miles, and we're comparing that to the circumference the ISS should be covering. So I tried using the diameter of the Earth given by Google, and I tried using the diameter of the Earth calculated from the circumference of the Earth that NASA gives us. And then I also tried using the diameter of the Earth that NASA tells young students that is the information for them to use to calculate the size of their planet. And so when we use these diameters and then we add 248 miles twice to figure out the circumference of the circle the ISS should be traveling around, we get a circle of 195 miles bigger than the ISS is telling us it's traveling around. So the world that the ISS is traveling around appears to be nearly 200 miles smaller than the world that everybody else, including NASA, is telling us we live on. So, this is problematic. Conspiracy.